My name is Cheryl, and I'm 56 years old. For most of my life, I believed love was something you settled into like a favorite chair, comfortable, predictable, maybe a little worn around the edges. I married young, raised 2 children, and lived in the same quiet cul-de-sac for over 20 years. I thought I knew who I was, what I wanted, and where my story would end. But life has a funny way of catching you off guard when you least expect it. I never thought something like this could happen to me. Please, don't make the same mistake I did. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind where the light comes in soft and golden through the kitchen blinds, warming the tile under your feet and making the dust in the air sparkle like tiny stars. I had just finished a late lunch, chicken salad, some fruit, nothing fancy, and was rinsing off dishes when I heard a knock at the back door. I dried my hands on a towel and opened it to find Daniel, my neighbor's husband, standing there with a sheepish smile and a cardboard box in his arms. "Hey, Cheryl," he said, shifting the box. "Kathy asked me to return your pie dish and these books she borrowed. Hope I'm not interrupting anything." I shook my head and smiled. Of course not. Come on in. Daniel and Kathy had moved in 3 houses down about 4 years ago. She was bright and talkative, and Daniel was the quieter type, steady, kind-eyed, and always willing to help around the neighborhood. We had shared barbecues and block parties, but never more than a few casual conversations. Still, there was something comforting about him, like a deep breath on a stressful day. He followed me into the kitchen, setting the box down on the counter. I noticed how carefully he handled it, like it might break. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, and his forearms were dusted with flour. He must have been helping Kathy bake again. "Want some coffee?" I asked before I even realized it. I just made a fresh pot. He hesitated a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, sure. That sounds nice." We sat at the kitchen table, the air filled with the gentle clink of mugs and the hum of the refrigerator. The conversation started small: weather, neighborhood repairs, Kathy's garden. He asked about my kids, and I told him how my daughter had just started grad school in Chicago. We both laughed when I showed him a picture of my son's new dog, which looked like it had eaten a mop. But then something shifted. He looked down into his coffee for a long moment, fingers wrapped tightly around the mug. "You ever feel like the life you built is suddenly not enough?" he asked quietly. I froze mid-sip. His voice was steady, but there was a tiredness beneath it, something fragile. I set my mug down gently. "All the time," I said, and meant it more than I expected. He looked up, and for the first time, his eyes really met mine. There was something searching in them, something unspoken. And in that moment, the noise of the world seemed to hush. We didn't talk for a while after that. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet, present. Then I stood, gathered the coffee mugs, and turned to the sink. "You don't have to do that," Daniel said, standing too. "It's just dishes," I smiled. "I've done a million of them." He stepped beside me and reached for the dish towel. "Then let me help." I didn't protest. We fell into a rhythm quickly, me washing and drying. The movements were simple, mechanical, but the space between us felt charged in a way I couldn't name. His arm brushed mine once, and I felt it like a ripple through my chest. I glanced sideways at him. He was looking out the window, a small smile tugging at his lips, like he was lost in thought. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, it's just nice. This, being here, talking with you." I didn't know what to say. I turned back to the dishes, focusing on the warm water and soap bubbles, but my mind was a mess of emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. When had someone last looked at me like that? When had someone simply noticed me? As we finished, he handed me the last plate and held it a little longer than necessary. His fingers brushed mine, soft and deliberate. My breath caught. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then paused. "I should get going," he said instead, his voice low. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I walked him to the door, and he turned back just before stepping outside. "Thanks for the coffee and the conversation." "Any time," I said, though we both knew it wasn't casual anymore. He left, and I stood in the doorway long after the screen door swung shut, the scent of him, cinnamon and soap, still lingering in the air. I didn't know what this was. I didn't know where it would lead. But I knew that something had shifted, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. The days that followed felt different. The ordinary rhythms of my life, the morning coffee, the quiet walks, the soft creak of the porch swing, suddenly felt louder, more noticeable, as though something beneath the surface had stirred and refused to settle back down. I'd see Daniel sometimes from my window, mowing the lawn, carrying groceries. Once he waved at me while walking his dog, and I instinctively waved back, a little too quickly, like a teenager with a crush. I chuckled to myself afterward, shaking my head. Get it together, Cheryl. But I couldn't stop replaying that moment in the kitchen. The way he looked at me, the weight of his words, that gentle, lingering touch of his fingers against mine. Saturday came, and Kathy knocked on my door with a cheerful grin and a covered tray. "Brought you some lemon bars. Daniel says they're too sweet, but I think they're perfect." I smiled and accepted them, trying to keep my voice light. "He helped you bake again." "He always does. Honestly, he's better than me at it. Too bad he hates lemon." I nodded, but something in my stomach twisted. We chatted a few more minutes, just neighborly things, yard work, summer plans, how the mailman always leaves letters at the wrong house, and then she left, her perfume lingering faintly in the hallway. I closed the door and leaned against it, tray still in hand. The scent of lemon and sugar floated up to my nose, but it made me feel strangely hollow. That evening, I walked down to the mailbox just before sunset. The sky was dipped in streaks of pink and amber, and a warm breeze stirred the trees. I took my time walking back, enjoying the quiet, when I noticed Daniel in his garage, working on something. He looked up and caught my eye. "Evening," he called. I hesitated. "Evening. You've got a minute." I did. I told myself I'd just say hello, be polite, then walk home. He waved me over, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm fixing up Kathy's old garden bench. Figured it's better than buying a new one." The bench sat between us, half-sanded, its wood faded and split. "That thing's been around forever," I said, smiling. "I remember her painting it teal 5 years ago. It matched her earrings." Daniel laughed. "It still does. She wears them every time she sits on it, like a ritual." There was a beat of silence, comfortable but charged. "You ever feel like you're part of a routine you didn't sign up for?" he asked suddenly, voice quieter. I looked at him, unsure what to say. He leaned on the work table, eyes on the bench, not me. "Don't get me wrong, I love Kathy. I do. But sometimes it feels like I'm standing outside my life, watching it happen instead of living it." The breeze rustled the leaves. I stepped closer. "I know that feeling," I said. "Sometimes I sit at the table in the morning and stare out the window for 20 minutes before I even take a sip of coffee. It's like my body's there, but my heart is somewhere else." He looked at me then, really looked, and it made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. I think that's why the other day felt different, he said. It wasn't about dishes. It was just easy, real. My breath hitched slightly. I nodded, unsure how to hold all the weight of what he was saying. I've thought about it too, I admitted. He took a small step closer, and suddenly we weren't just neighbors anymore. We were two people standing in a quiet garage, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and evening air, holding more truth than either of us had dared to speak aloud. I should head back, I said, voice barely above a whisper. Okay, he replied, but his eyes didn't leave mine. Thanks for stopping by. As I turned and walked back toward my house, my heart was thudding in my chest, fast and uneven. Every step felt like I was moving through fog, uncertain, heavy, yet strangely alive. That night, I lay awake far too long, staring at the ceiling. My life, so carefully arranged, was shifting, and I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't looking for anything that day in the kitchen. But now I wasn't sure I could ignore what I had found. The next week was a blur of restless sleep and second-guessing myself. I went about my days like normal, groceries, laundry, calls with my daughter, but there was a low hum inside me that never went quiet. Every sound seemed sharper, every silence heavier. I avoided the garage when I walked past Daniel and Kathy's house, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I did, too much. On Wednesday afternoon, I was out in my backyard trimming the rose bushes when I heard the soft clang of a metal gate. I turned and saw Daniel standing just beyond the low fence that separated our yards. He looked hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should speak. "Hey," he finally said, "you've been quiet." I wiped my hands on my gardening gloves. "Yeah, I guess I've just been busy." He nodded slowly. "Mind if I come over?" I didn't answer right away. My heart was already beating faster. "Sure," I said after a moment, barely above a whisper. He walked around the gate and stepped into my yard. The sun was low, casting a warm orange hue across everything. He stood a few feet from me, close enough that I could smell that familiar blend of fresh laundry and cedar. "I've been thinking," he said, glancing down at the grass, "about how we talked, about how I felt when we did." I stayed still, waiting. "I don't want to mess up anything. Not with you. Not with Kathy," he said, and there was sincerity in his voice that made my chest tighten. "But something's been missing from my life for a long time, Cheryl, and I didn't even realize it until you." My breath caught. "Daniel, I don't want to be the reason something breaks." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with something raw. "You're not the reason. You're the reminder." That hit harder than I expected. We sat down on the patio bench, the cushions still warm from the sun. The silence between us stretched, not awkwardly, but with weight. "You know," I began slowly, "when my husband left me 7 years ago, I told myself I was okay, that I didn't need anyone. I filled my days with chores and my nights with books. I convinced myself that peace was enough." Daniel turned toward me, listening without interruption. "But then the other day in the kitchen, something changed. It was like I remembered what it felt like to be noticed, to be cared for, even in the smallest way." He nodded gently. "That's exactly how I felt." We didn't move closer. We didn't touch. But emotionally, something shifted again. Not loud, not sudden, just real. A soft breeze picked up, rustling the leaves overhead. I closed my eyes for a moment and let it wash over me. "I'm scared," I said quietly, "of what this could mean, of what it says about me. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You're not doing anything wrong, Cheryl. We've just both been living in silence for too long. And maybe this, whatever this is us finally hearing something. The words hung there, gentle and true. After a while, he stood. I should go, he said, not with regret, but with restraint. I nodded. But I'd like to see you again, he added, just to talk. No pressure. I gave a small, weary smile. I'd like that too. And as he walked back to his yard, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Not reckless, wild hope, but quiet, grounded hope. The kind that doesn't demand answers right away. The kind that waits. That night, I stood by the kitchen sink, watching the moonlight spill across the counter. I reached for the dish soap and turned on the water. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. A few days later, I found myself standing in my kitchen again, hands deep in a sink full of warm, soapy water. The late afternoon light filtered in through the window, glinting off the faucet, and for a moment, everything felt familiar. But I wasn't the same woman I had been just weeks ago. I had changed, slowly, quietly, in the spaces between conversations and the pauses between words. I heard a soft knock at the back door. My heart didn't race this time. It just fluttered gently. Daniel stood there, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and jeans. His hair was a little messy, like he'd run his hands through it a few too many times. He held a small paper bag in his hands. Hey, he said, smiling, I brought lemon muffins. Kathy's out with her sister, so I figured. I smiled and stepped aside, letting him in without saying a word. We sat at the table, the silence easy between us. He placed the bag down and pulled out 2 muffins. The scent of citrus filled the air. I don't want to lie, he said after a moment. To Kathy. To myself. Or to you. I looked at him, unsure where this was going. I talked to her yesterday, he continued. Told her I needed space to think, that something in me didn't feel settled anymore. I didn't say anything about you, not out of shame, but because this isn't about blame. It's about truth. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. How did she take it? She was surprised. Hurt, I think, but maybe not entirely shocked. He paused. We've both been going through the motions. She even said, it's like we've been good roommates for years, not partners. I nodded, feeling the weight of that reality. I wasn't rooting for his marriage to fail. I had never wanted that. But I couldn't deny what was growing between us. Daniel leaned forward. I'm not asking for anything, Cheryl. Not a decision, not a promise. I just wanted you to know I'm not going to pretend anymore. Not in my life. Not with my heart. I looked down at my hands, fingers resting on the rim of my mug. My mind swirled with questions, but my heart felt still. I don't know what this is yet, I said quietly. But I know how I feel when I'm around you. I feel seen, heard, like I matter in a way I haven't in a long time. He reached out, gently covering my hand with his. It was the first time he touched me like that, without hesitation, without apology. And in that touch, there was no urgency, just presence. We sat there for a long time, saying very little. The sun dipped lower, casting the kitchen in golden light. Outside, the world continued as usual, birds chirping, wind brushing through leaves, but inside, something had quietly opened. A new chapter, maybe. A possibility. Later that evening, after Daniel had gone, I stood barefoot in my backyard, the grass cool under my feet. I tilted my face up toward the darkening sky, stars just beginning to peek through the twilight. I thought about all the years I spent burying pieces of myself to keep things tidy, to keep the peace, to fit the mold of who I thought I was supposed to be. But now I was starting to remember who I really was underneath it all. And maybe, just maybe, that woman was ready to let herself be known again. Not just by someone else, but by herself.